know that most people think that physical abuse is obvious, right? It's a black eye, it's a broken bone, it's something so undeniable that anyone would believe you. And that's exactly why so many women miss the fact that they're already being physically abused because it doesn't always look like that. And this isn't just theory, right? I'm going to give you a real life example. September 2025, Tyreek Hill, one of the NFL's most famous wide receivers, a Super Bowl champion with the Miami Dolphins, was accused in court filings by his wife, Keita, of physically abusing her multiple times during their very short marriage. She says that he pushed her to the floor, spit on her, and assaulted her, even while she was pregnant. If one of the richest, most celebrated athletes in the world could do this behind closed doors and still be shielded by all the fame and the power, you can see how easy it is for just an everyday man to get away with abuse without anyone noticing. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and to honor that, I'm launching this series, The 8 Types of Abuse. I'm going to break down a form of abuse in relationships, not the surface level version that you always hear about, but like the real patterns that women live through, the ones that don't always get named. Abuse isn't just one thing, and most of the time, it actually doesn't look like what people imagine. You think that physical abuse means a black eye, right? We talked about broken bones. Something obvious enough that anybody would believe you. And yeah, there are times that it looks exactly like that. But here's what you need to know. Most of the time, it doesn't. And that is why so many women stay longer than they wanted to, because they're telling themselves, well, he hasn't actually hit me. That one line has kept more women trapped than you could ever imagine. But here's the reality. Globally, 1 in 3 women will experience physical or sexual violence in her lifetime, and almost always at the hands of a man she knows. In the US, nearly 1 in 4 women have experienced severe physical violence by an intimate partner. And these aren't rare cases, right? This is widespread. And yet, because abuse doesn't always leave visible marks, it's minimized, dismissed, or ignored. What I'm going to break down today might surprise you. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why physical abuse doesn't always look like what you think it does, how abusive men get away with it, and the one thing that they all count on you not realizing until it's too late. I'm Lisa Sonni. I'm a toxic and abusive relationship expert and coach. I help women break trauma bonds, leave abusive men, and rebuild their lives. If you've ever doubted what you went through was abuse, whether that actually counts, make sure that you subscribe, because this whole series is going to give you the language for things that you've lived through but could never name. So I want to talk about physical abuse first, what it actually looks like in relationships. Now, physical abuse, it's not just about leaving bruises. It's not always so obvious. It is about power and control. Now, that power can show up in ways that don't always leave a mark, but they would absolutely leave you terrified of what could happen next. So I'll give you an example. Let's say he's punching walls, slamming doors, he's throwing things across the room. That's physical abuse. You don't actually need him to touch you to feel the message in your body. This could be you next time. You flinch every time something drops on the floor because you've been conditioned to expect violence. And later, he might even laugh about it, right? Oh my God, I was just letting off steam. It's not like I hit you. But you weren't laughing. You were shaking. Or he blocks a doorway so you can't leave. That is crazy common. He doesn't have to hold you down. Just standing there is enough to trap you. And I hear women say, well, he didn't actually grab me. No, but you stood there frozen, right? With your heart racing because you knew exactly what he was capable of if you tried to push past him. That fear is the entire point. It's not always fists. Sometimes it's everyday objects, right? Like a phone whipped across the room, a glass of water thrown in your face, a chair shoved out of the way that hits you or nearly hits you. One woman actually told me that her partner used to just grab her keys and dig them into her arm when they fought. Another told me that she'd been choked with a seat belt while she was in the passenger seat. These are not accidents. Abusers use objects to blur the line between anger and violence. So you're not even sure what to call it. He didn't hit you, but he wrapped a seatbelt around your neck. There's also the destruction of property, right? Smashing your phone against the wall, ripping up photos, breaking dishes. Survivors often say things like, well, it was just stuff. It's not about the stuff. It's about him showing you how easily he could break you. It's about showing you you're next, or that you could be next, and that's enough. Sometimes it's just his size, just his strength, right? He's towering over you. He's inches from your face. He's clenching his fists. He's grabbing the couch so hard that it shakes. He doesn't have to swing because your body already gets the message. He could, and you couldn't stop him. Reckless driving is another one that people don't talk about enough. Physical abuse. When you're in the car, he's flooring it. He's hearing you beg him to slow down, and he refuses. It's not bad driving. It's physical abuse. Think about it. You're strapped into a moving weapon with somebody who is reminding you that he controls whether you live or die in that moment. I've had clients say it was the most terrifying thing they've ever been through, worse than being hit, because it actually makes them think that they wouldn't make it home. Sometimes there's kids in the back seat. Physical abuse can overlap with sexual abuse, like if he pins you down, forces you into painful positions, calls it rough sex, you didn't actually consent. It's not sex in those cases, by the way, non-consensual sex. There's a 4-letter word for that. If you didn't consent, that's physical abuse through sexual violence. And it's even more confusing when he flips afterward, being all nice and tender, like you liked it. Meanwhile, you're left questioning yourself when all you felt was fear. That said, sexual abuse really is its own topic, and it will be part of the series in a standalone video because it really deserves its whole own topic. Pregnancy is another time that abuse escalates. Statistics show that pregnant women are at higher risk of physical violence. And in fact, domestic violence during pregnancy is more common than conditions doctors routinely screen for, like preeclampsia or gestational diabetes. And in the US, homicide is one of the leading causes of death for pregnant women, most often at the hands of an intimate partner. The truth is, abusers know that when you're pregnant, you're at your most vulnerable, right? Grabbing your stomach during an argument, threatening the baby if you don't behave, pushing you while you're carrying. It is horrifying, right? But it's also intentional. He knows that you're dependent and he uses it to reinforce his control. So let's not downplay the so-called minor acts, shoving, grabbing, yanking your arm, spitting in your face. Women minimize these things all the time, right? It wasn't that bad. He just shoved me. Those little acts, they're deliberate. They're humiliating, and they're designed to remind you that he has the power to escalate whenever he chooses. And once you've seen that he's willing to cross that line, fear does not go away. Now, here's the part that so many women are just not talking about, how we rationalize it in the moment. The stories that you tell yourself to make it survivable, right? You're like, he didn't hit me, so it doesn't count. Or my favorite, well, he was drunk. He didn't mean it. He was just angry. He just lost control. So you tell yourself that if you don't push his buttons, then it won't happen again. But that's literally how abuse works, right? It trains you to explain it away so you can just keep functioning inside of it. But the problem is those explanations are lies that you have to swallow, that you tell yourself just to get through your day. And while your brain is trying to minimize it, your body knows the truth. It knows what's happening. I want you to think about how you felt the last time he had you cornered, right? That sick feeling in your stomach, your pounding heart, hard to breathe, the shaking in your hands, didn't even stop when he walked away, right? That is your nervous system screaming, you're not safe. So even when the marks don't show, your body is literally holding that fear. So let's talk about what makes this really so hard for women to just call this abuse. Society only seems to believe women when the evidence is obvious, right? So if you tell a friend he punched the wall, you risk hearing, well, he didn't hit you, or at least he didn't hit you. And if you say something like, well, I tried to leave, but he blocked the door, someone's like, okay, so like what, he just stood there? It might sound small when you describe it, but I'm telling you, in the moment, we know it is terrifying, and abusers rely on that. It's like plausible deniability. Oh, what, I just stood there. She's scared? Don't be ridiculous. But yet it makes so much sense that you're scared. Abusers know how far they can go while still being able to deny it later. And I'm telling you, that minimization, it is everywhere. People say, well, all couples fight, or he just has anger issues. But I want you to ask yourself this. Why doesn't he punch the walls at work? Why doesn't he scream in his mother's face? Because he knows better, which is proof that it's not a lack of control, it's a choice. And physical abuse doesn't just end when the moment ends, right? Because there are consequences that don't show up in all the pictures. chronic pain from being shoved or restrained, fear of loud noises, sudden movements because they remind you of slamming doors, planning every escape route in public spaces because you learned what it feels like to be trapped. These are not just side effects. This is what women live with every day. So I want to be clear about something. People love to say, well, sometimes both partners get physical. No, no. Sometimes women might yell, they might even shove you back in self-defense. But the difference is that abuse is about establishing control. It is about one person creating the fear so that the other person submits. That's not mutual. That's domination. It's also wrapped up with all these other forms of abuse, right? The shove, the physical abuse, it comes after that verbal lashing. The reckless driving happens after hours of psychological manipulation. It's not just one thing. It's actually the layering of abuse that really traps you, right? Because then you're confused, destabilized, and frankly, you're always just kind of baseline scared. So the part that's really the hardest to swallow is that you don't need a bruise or blood for it to be real. If he uses his body or objects to intimidate you, restrain you, hurt you, even once, that is physical abuse, period. Now, right now, you might be realizing this is you. Maybe you've excused the wall punching or told yourself that it's just anger. Maybe you've convinced yourself that the shoving didn't really count. But listen, if your body was ever used as a target, a threat, a pawn, you have lived through physical abuse. And this matters because once you see it for what it is, you stop waiting for it to get bad enough to leave. You stop comparing your pain to someone else's injuries, and you start recognizing that the fear that you have felt was already the proof. This is just the beginning because in part 2 of this series, I'm going to get into sexual abuse in relationships and not the obvious violations, but the ones that nobody else wants to talk about. The ways that partners cross lines, then they make you feel like you consented because you eventually said yes, they wore you down. Trust me, what I'm going to share in that video, you're not going to hear anywhere else. So subscribe now so you don't miss it. And if this video resonated, I want you to share it with someone who needs to hear this today, or possibly a family member who doesn't believe that you've been physically abused. When most people hear the words sexual abuse, they don't necessarily picture a relationship, right? They don't picture a husband or a boyfriend or someone you love. They imagine violence in a dark alley or some man physically pinning you down. And that's why so many women don't recognize what they've lived through as abuse, because it didn't look like that. The truth is, sexual abuse in relationships often doesn't even involve force that leaves marks. It looks like pressure, guilt trips, sulking, or the silent treatment until you give in. It looks like being touched when you're asleep. It looks like agreeing to sex because honestly, that just feels safer than saying no. There are forms of sexual abuse that women rarely name, but they are abuse. And here's the hardest part. So many women don't realize that they've been sexually abused until years later because society doesn't call it what it is, because he convinced you that giving in was the same thing as agreeing, because nobody ever told you that coercion is abuse too. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and to honor that, I am continuing my series, The 8 Types of Abuse. In part 1, I broke down physical abuse. Today, in part 2, we are talking about sexual abuse in intimate relationships. Not the version that most people picture, but the actual patterns that women live through every single day, and the ones that basically never get named. And I want to be clear. This episode might be really uncomfortable to hear, but by the end, you're going to understand the patterns of sexual abuse in relationships and the lies abusers use to excuse them, and why so many women minimize what they've actually lived through. I'm Lisa Sonni. I'm a toxic and abusive relationship expert and certified coach, and I help women break trauma bonds, leave abusive men, leave sexually coercive men, and rebuild their lives. If you've ever wondered why sex felt unsafe, why you were that weird wife that didn't want to sleep with her husband, or questioned if what happened to you counts as abuse, make sure that you subscribe, because this whole series is going to give you the language for what you've lived through, but maybe you've never been able to say out loud. Now, I want to tell you something kind of personal for a moment. I hate talking about this topic. I absolutely loathe having this as my topic for the internet, because what's on the internet bad men, the men who hate what I'm saying, the men who feel so entitled, the men who think there's this massive difference between pressure and coercion, the men who think it's owed to them, that it's your duty to perform this for them, that it is something that they get and you give. And all of that is exactly why I am making this video, because it needs to be said. And to those men, please, go find another channel, because this video, this channel is unequivocally not for you. And I will block you so quickly. So whatever you want to type into the comment section will disappear. My page, my rules. So let's talk about what sexual abuse can actually look like in relationships, specifically some of the more covert ways rather than the more obvious ones. Sexual abuse is not always violent. It is often in the pressure that you feel when he keeps pushing after you've already said no, when he sighs, when he sulks or accuses you of rejecting him until you give in just to keep the peace. He might tell you, if you loved me, you'd do it. It only takes 5 minutes. Or he goes cold, withdraws affection. He punishes you until you finally agree. That's coercion. And coercion is not consent. But as I said, abusive men, they don't see it that way. They tell themselves that pressure isn't coercion. It's just convincing, right? She said yes. They see your eventual yes as proof that you wanted it, and they willfully ignore the fact that the only reason you gave in was because no didn't feel safe. Abusive men often don't even care what made you say yes. Some of these men are literally okay to have sex knowing you didn't want to, and some actually demand that you seem into it so that they can pretend that you are when they know, consciously or unconsciously, that you don't. And then there's marital rape. Sex just straight up without your consent inside a committed relationship. And for years, wasn't even a crime. In the US, marital rape wasn't even illegal in every state until the 90s. Abusers exploit that history, right? And the whole belief that marriage equals permanent access to your body. Marriage itself is consent. They say things like, you're my wife, you can't deny me. Or my favorite, I have needs and it's your job to meet them. Or if you don't have sex with me, then I'll just cheat. If you have to threaten her to get sex, she didn't consent. That's not sex. That's ownership. And I want to ask you if ownership or obligation has ever been sexy to you. Didn't think so. No. And it doesn't always look like what you'd expect, right? Sometimes it's when you're asleep and you wake up to him already on top of you. Sometimes it's when you freeze and he takes your silence as agreement. Sometimes it's when you finally just break down and you say yes after resisting for hours because you just want to stop the fight. You just don't want to deal with the consequences, the pissy attitude for the next week. None of those things are consent. Now, some men take it even further, right? Some men drug their wives, slipping them pills or alcohol so refusal isn't even possible. And you don't actually hear about it that often because it's one of the most hidden forms of violation, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen that often. It absolutely happens. And it exposes exactly how far entitlement will go when a man decides your body is his, regardless of your will. You have no autonomy with a man like this. And even when it's not that extreme, like our culture really just normalizes the sort of softer versions of the same mindset, right? You think about the jokes that men make online about giving their wives wine to get them in the mood. We're supposed to laugh, but that's not humor. That's a confession. What they're really saying is, she doesn't want me, so I will impair her ability to say no. And people go, it's just a joke. Jokes are supposed to be funny, not promote rape culture. The likes, the laughs that those jokes get are proof that society is totally comfortable with the idea that women's consent can be bypassed, negotiated, or just blurred. So what's happening inside the mind of a man who does this? The first is entitlement. Basically, he sees your body as his property, right? In his head, relationships and marriage contracts give him permanent access, right? You hear men say it all the time. What's the point of being married if I don't get all access to your body? Saying no isn't a boundary that he has to respect. It's this inconvenience that he feels he needs to work around. Second, he denies your autonomy. He doesn't see you as someone with an independent desire, right? You're not a partner. You are an outlet for his needs. So if you're asleep, he tells himself it's fine because, like, we're together. If you're drunk, he tells himself it doesn't matter because he got what he wanted. You're married, right? You're in a relationship, right? In his little twisted worldview, the fact that you exist as his wife or girlfriend means he doesn't need your permission. He has it. Bad mood, bad day, it's been a week, all valid reasons for him to just take it. Now, third, he reframes the violation as intimacy. This guy's going to convince himself that he's being affectionate or passionate, right? He says, well, you didn't say no, or you always like it once we start. He even tells himself that waking you up with sex is romantic. You know, the guys that are like, I would love it if you did that, as if that means that you should love it. He rewrites the abuse in his head so he never has to call it what it is. Assault. Now, fourth, he is backed up by cultural permission, right? He grew up in a world that told him that men have needs and that women are supposed to meet them. And a world that makes excuses for husbands, right? Like, what do you expect if you never give it to him? A world that taught him that sex is something that he's owed, not something that he shares. He knows that if you speak up, people are going to say you're exaggerating or you're frigid or it's just part of marriage. I mean, even women make jokes, right? Like, oh, it's just 10 minutes and then I got to get it over with. She doesn't want to sleep with you. Ugh. I don't know how a man could go through with this action knowing that she doesn't want to. It is so sick. Now, finally, this really isn't about desire at all, right? It's actually about control, but he disguised it as desire. If he drugs you, if he initiates it when you're sleeping, or he pressures and coerces you until you give in, the point of any of that isn't closeness. The point is reminding you that he can take what he wants. You don't get to choose when or how. It's power. It's not passion. If he coerces you into acts that you don't want to engage in, that's abuse. If you don't feel like you can say no, that's abuse. If you have a calendar, whether it's written down or in your head, and you know the exact last time that you did it, and you know that you can only go X number of days before you do it again, otherwise his mood is off, he's angry, he's pissy, that's abuse. You are in an abusive relationship. And actually, to be fair, I might leave up some of these men's comments that will undoubtedly come just to make my point, because you'll see their mindset so clearly. You will see the entitlement. When you break it all down like this, to me, the picture is crystal clear. Abusive men don't think that they're raping their wives. They think that they're entitled to sex, and anything short of you physically fighting them off isn't refusal. And even then, they'd be pissed off that you do that, right? They don't call it coercion because in their head, coercion is just what men do. And I know that topics like this make those abusive men so angry, right? They feel so entitled. They see what I'm saying as wildly wrong. They call me a misandrist. They make jokes about my own relationship. They'll say all of these awful things to make their point, but they've actually made no point at all, perhaps except my own. There's an entitlement, right? Like this is so true for them, so ingrained in how they feel and what they believe that me saying women should have the ability to say yes is just absurd. It is absurd to an abusive man. They will watch. You'll see it in the comments if I don't delete them, and I may. The impact on women through all of this, it's so devastating because you start to doubt yourself. You wonder if you're exaggerating or if you're causing the problems because, right, men need sex, right? They're wired differently. There's no science to prove that. None. After you engage in this act, right, you feel dirty, ashamed, complicit, maybe like you should have done more to stop it, or it's just something that you have to do to get through life. You freeze, you disassociate, you just leave your body and you wait for it to be over. And afterward, you tell yourself not to think about it because honestly, the alternative is admitting that the man that you share a life with is violating you. But as they say, the body keeps score, and your body registers this as a violation, even if your brain is telling you something different. The truth is, if you froze, if you gave in because it just felt safer than saying no because you didn't want the consequences, if he touched you while you were asleep, if he pressured you relentlessly until you just stopped resisting, that's not consent. It's sexual abuse. And I'm telling you, this isn't rare. Nearly 1 in 10 women in the United States has been raped by an intimate partner. Marital rape was legal in most places until a few decades ago. And still today, coercion is minimized, ignored, or basically just laughed about like it's not serious. But it is. It leaves lasting trauma, even if you never had the words for it until right now. I actually want to share a website with you, alwaysmending.com. And you can learn all about coercion much more specifically. Her name is Nat Lejeune. She's incredible. So let me be crystal clear. You were violated, and naming it matters. This is part 2 of the 8 types of abuse. Now, in part 3, I'm going to break down psychological abuse, right? The mind games and the gaslighting, manipulation that makes you doubt your own reality. If this episode made things click, the next one will show you exactly how abusers basically set the stage so you can't even trust yourself. So subscribe now so you don't miss it, and comment if you're comfortable with what you've experienced that I didn't cover on this topic. If this resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear the truth about what sexual abuse in relationships can really look like. Most people think that psychological abuse just is like harsh words or somebody being mean, but it's so much more than that. It is so much deeper than that. Psychological abuse is really about breaking down your mind, your perception of reality, until you cannot trust yourself anymore. And here's the part that people very rarely talk about. Studies show that psychological abuse can be just as damaging as physical abuse, sometimes even worse in the long run. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and to honor that, I'm continuing my series, The 8 Types of Abuse. In part 1, I broke down physical abuse. In part 2, I covered sexual abuse, my least favorite topic. Today, in part 3, we're talking about psychological abuse. The kind that doesn't leave marks on your skin, but it does rewire your brain, your body, and your sense of who you are. And I want you to know that if you've ever been called too sensitive or crazy, or that you're imagining things inside of your relationship, you'll recognize yourself in this episode. I'm Lisa Sonni. I'm a toxic and abusive relationship expert, certified coach, and author. I help people break trauma bonds. I help women leave abusive men and rebuild their lives. This series is really about giving you the language for what you've lived through, but you probably couldn't name. So make sure that you subscribe, because once you see these patterns clearly, you can never unsee them. Let's get into it. So first, what's the difference between emotional abuse and psychological abuse? And then later in the video, I'm going to break down the type of man who uses this kind of abuse to his advantage. So stick around for that. Emotional abuse, it manipulates your feelings, right? It's guilt tripping and shame, withholding affection. Psychological abuse actually manipulates your mind. It destabilizes your perception of reality. It leaves you doubting your memory, your judgment, and your sanity. And when you can't trust your own mind, you become dependent on his, and that's the goal. So what does this actually look like? Here's some wild examples, okay? Gaslighting is the big one, right? That never happened. You're remembering wrong. You're crazy. Over time, you start second guessing everything, right? From what was said last night to whether or not your anger is even valid. One client told me once that she started keeping screenshots of text conversations, not because she wanted proof to confront him with, but because she needed proof for herself. That is how deep gaslighting cuts. I have a client whose partner would gaslight her by saying, almost laughing about it, "I can't believe that you and I always have such a different perception of what happened," as if he wasn't intentionally trying to confuse her. It was presented to her as this like funny difference of how they interpreted what was said or what happened. But can we all just stop for a moment? Can we see this? What was said and what happened isn't subjective. How somebody feels about something, yeah, that's subjective. But framing it like a difference in perception is kind of a perfect example of gaslighting. In fact, quick story time here. I actually knew someone who would frame things to me like, okay, I just wanted to talk to you, but I don't want you to get upset. Okay, so I think I just, how can I say this in the right way? They're framing me as the problem before the conversation even started, right? And then they say something offensive. And if I got upset, it becomes, "Oh, see, I knew you'd react like this." It's like preemptively undermining me right off the bat. Struggling to find the right words, that is completely performative. And yeah, I know that that's not always the case every single time someone does that, but this is a really subtle form of gaslighting. And there are probably a million examples that I could use. But let's move on to another form of psychological abuse. I want to talk about those crazy making contradictions, right? He praises you in front of friends, but at home, rips you apart, tears you down. One day he says you're the best thing that ever happened to him. And the next day he says you ruin everything. That constant flip-flop is not accidental. It keeps you off balance. So you're always trying harder to get that good version of him. Well, then there's the threats. Not just threats to hit you, those happen, but threats to leave you, to take the kids, to ruin you financially, threats to harm himself if you don't comply. And these threats don't have to be shouted, right? Sometimes they're very quiet. Sometimes they're even implied, not directly said, right? You wouldn't survive without me. If you ever left, I would kill myself. That is psychological abuse. It traps you in fear, but that responsibility isn't yours. You hear things like, you couldn't afford this place without me. Translation, leave me and you'll lose your home. You don't want to see me when I'm really mad. Translation, step out of line and you'll get hurt. People will believe me before they believe you. Translation, if you speak out, I will destroy your credibility. And those are threats, right? They're indirect, but they're threats, but they're not illegal to make. You feel threatened and you're supposed to, but it's not illegal. Isolation is another one, right? He convinces you that your friends don't really care. Your family is against you. Nobody else would ever want you. And over time, you withdraw, not because you actually want to, but because it actually feels safer than constantly being told that you're wrong for needing anybody but him. And this ranges from anything like, you can't go see your friend Daniela. No. To, I don't know why you always want to hang out with Daniela. She hates me. The second is so much more subtle, right? But he didn't say that you couldn't go. So he's not controlling, right? But you feel like you can't go and you police yourself at that point, right? That's how these abusers get into your head. And then there are the mind games that most people can never name, right? They deliberately change details of a story so you seem forgetful, or telling one version of events today and another tomorrow and then mocking you for not keeping it straight, or picking fights late at night when you're exhausted so you agree to things that you wouldn't if you were actually alert or awake. These are subtle, right? But they work. Lesser known forms are things like using silence strategically. And I don't just mean the silent treatment, but like going completely cold during an argument until you beg to make up because you can't stand the tension anymore. Hiding your keys, hiding your wallet, hiding your phone, and then pretending that you misplaced them. Forgetting things that matter to you over and over. That's supposed to make you feel invisible, right? These games make you feel like you're losing your grip when actually you're being manipulated. This is psychological abuse. Okay, other tactics. Triangulation, right? Dragging other people into your arguments. Saying things like, even your sister thinks that you're overreacting, right? Bringing other people into it to make you feel crazy. Or projection. Accusing you of the very things that they are guilty of, right? You're so controlling when he's the one that's monitoring your every move. Now, these are double binds, right? You're trapped in these no-win situations, which is kind of like a total characteristic of being in an abusive relationship. If you speak up, you're crazy. If you stay quiet, you're cold. And then there's narcissistic word salad, just talking in circles until you are so confused that you give up even trying to make sense of it. And then there's withholding, right? Stonewalling at every attempt that you make to communicate. It leaves your head spinning, but he just stands there watching. In my book, Narcissism Unmasked, I actually take you through 125 terms and tactics of abuse. The link is in the description. So all of these things that I'm discussing here, it's all psychological abuse, but none of them leave bruises. Nobody can see it, but it leaves you destabilized. So let's talk about what kind of man does this, right? He's not just a guy who loses his temper. He just doesn't know how to communicate. This is a man who engages in psychological abuse, and he's calculated. He knows what he's doing, right? He picks tactics that confuse you, that make you doubt yourself, that keep him in control, but he never had to raise a hand. Plausible deniability. And on the outside, I'm telling you, this guy is charming. He's polished. At work, he's admired. People like him. Maybe he's funny with his friends. Even with your family, he's warm sometimes, right? That's what makes the private abuse even more disorienting, because if he can be so normal out there, then maybe you really are the problem. But that's exactly what he wants you to think. He doesn't want a partner. He wants to control. And breaking your mind is so much cleaner than breaking your body because nobody can see it. It's deniable. If you call him out, he can smirk and be like, Wow, you're really overthinking things. Abuse? What are you, crazy? He looks calm. You look unhinged. That's the point. Now, people often ask me, but like, why does he do this? Wouldn't it just be easier to be nice so that he can be happy? No, because control is the end game. If dominance is what he wants, happiness isn't even part of this. The impact on you is like exhaustion, confusion. You start apologizing for things you didn't even do. You start asking for permission for things that you shouldn't have to ask for. You replay all these conversations in your head, trying to figure out, like, where did you get this wrong, right? You're exhausted before the fight even begins. Now, what's interesting is a 20-year-old study followed more than 8,000 women and children across 3 countries and found that emotional abuse and neglect often cause more damaging long-term effects than physical or sexual abuse. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, even psychosis. Dr. Lane Strathern, who led the research, said, emotional abuse and neglect are often hidden from our view, but may result in the most severe and debilitating long-term outcomes. Makes sense to me. Bruises heal. Broken bones heal. When somebody spends years convincing you that you're crazy, unlovable, incapable, those beliefs sink in. They change the way you see yourself. They change how you move through the world and even the way that your brain functions. Now, survivors often struggle with, and like, tell me if I'm wrong, brain fog, chronic anxiety, hypervigilance, always scanning for the next argument, even when nobody's there. Psychological abuse also shows up in our body, right? Studies show that it can increase the risk of heart disease, immune system problems, chronic pain, sleep disorders, mood disorders. When your nervous system is constantly in fight or flight from all these mind games that you can't even predict, your body is what's going to pay the price. But here's one of the worst damn parts about this. Society minimizes this form of abuse more than any other. You tell somebody, he says, I'm crazy all the time, and they shrug. All couples fight. You say, well, he keeps changing the story, and they laugh. Huh, men. Men just do that. Boys will be boys, right? Even the courts ignore it because it doesn't leave a mark. But make no mistake, psychological abuse leave scars every bit as real as physical abuse. So if you're sitting here wondering, was I even abused? Because it's so covert, you almost can't even name it. I want to give you that clarity. If you doubt your memory, your sanity, and your reality, just the fact that you doubt it, that is psychological abuse. If you've ever found yourself apologizing for things that you didn't do or don't remember doing because you didn't actually do them, you're questioning things that you know that you saw, you are begging somebody for clarity that is never going to come, that is psychological abuse. You weren't imagining it. You're being manipulated. This is part 3 of the 8 types of abuse. Now, in part 4, I'm going to break down verbal abuse, right? The insults, the yelling, the jokes that cut you down over time. That episode is going to make you rethink every time somebody said, oh, he's just kidding. So subscribe now because you don't want to miss it. And if this video resonated, please share it and leave a comment, because the more that we call this out, the less it can stay hidden. Let's drag these men out of the shadows and into the light. People love to say it's just words, but words aren't just words when they're used to tear people down. Verbal abuse is violence in communication. It hurts, it humiliates, and it conditions you to live in fear, and it destroys your self-worth, and it never leaves a mark. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and to honor that, I'm continuing my series, The 8 Types of Abuse. Part 1, we did physical abuse. In part 2, sexual abuse. In part 3, psychological abuse. And today, part 4, we are talking about verbal abuse. The obvious, the subtle, the insidious ways that men use words as weapons. And if you've ever wondered, am I just too sensitive? Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to see exactly how verbal abuse works and why it's not about being sensitive, it's about being targeted. I'm Lisa Sonni. I'm a toxic and abusive relationship expert, author, and coach. I help women break trauma bonds, leave abusive men, and rebuild their lives. This series is about naming the things that you lived through, but maybe you couldn't explain. So hit subscribe, because I don't want you to miss the rest of the series, because once you see it, You can't unsee it. Verbal abuse is any use of words or tone to belittle, intimidate, or control you. It's not about a communication style, right? It's about the intent. It's using language as a weapon to make someone else smaller. Now, the obvious forms can kind of be easy to spot, right? The insults, you're worthless, you're a B word, you're nothing without me. The yelling, the screaming during fights when the volume itself is meant to scare you. Then there's the direct threats, right? You'll regret this, or I'll ruin you. The public humiliation, right? Those little sharp jokes that land like a knife and everyone else laughs and you sit there and you try not to cry. But verbal abuse isn't just about blow-ups and name calling. There's also this really subtle, insidious form that just wears you down piece by piece. It's like he makes a joke or a cruel comment and he's like, I was just joking. It's not a joke. It's abuse with a laugh track. Or he uses sarcasm, and I don't mean that playful kind. I mean the kind where you're always the punchline, interrupting you mid-sentence when you try to talk, talking over you until you just give up. It's not even rudeness. It's silencing. And over time, it works. You stop speaking because you already know he's not going to let you finish. There's nitpicking, right? That like constantly correcting how you talk, how you cook, how you drive, how you sit. It's framed as helping or just being honest. Mine always used to say, you can't get mad at me for being honest. Yes, I can. And who said it's honest? It's a subjective opinion. The whole point here is to wear down your confidence. Minimizing and invalidating are huge ones. You bring up a concern and he's like, you're overreacting. You share your feelings and he's like, come on, it's not a big deal. What he's really saying is, your reality doesn't matter. And then there are the comparisons. Other women wouldn't complain about this. My ex never got mad about this. So-and-so's wife doesn't nag like you. Comparisons are verbal abuse because they can pit you against this imaginary standard that you can never meet. And oh my goodness, one of the most damaging forms of verbal abuse isn't even loud. It's silence, the silent treatment, refusing to answer questions, withholding words, affection, acknowledgement. He's cold, punishing, completely silent, but it's meant to make you beg and chase and squirm. And it is just as violent as screaming at you, but it looks calm. And calmness is often his weapon. Overall, listen, abuse is not black and white. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of overlap. Some of this is psychological abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse. It's not all the same thing, but there's a lot of overlap. Here are some really covert verbal tricks that most people do not even notice, but they do leave your head spinning in circles, okay? He twists your words back on you. Oh, so what you're saying is, you think I'm a terrible husband. Wow. And now suddenly you're defending something you never said. Now, as an aside, that is a straw man argument, and those are really effective because it changes what you said, and then you're defending yourself. Or he changes the argument mid-conversation, like you thought that you were talking about bills, but now you're defending how you're always a nag. He deliberately misinterprets you, so you're always clarifying and explaining and defending, keeps you on your toes. He mocks you by repeating your words back in like a whiny, stupid little voice. Or he uses condescension like you're a child. Calm down, sweetie. You don't even know what you're talking about. None of these things leave bruises, but they make you feel crazy and they make you completely doubt yourself. Now, public verbal abuse is a whole other layer, right? He makes a cutting joke about you in front of friends. He tells stories about you with all these humiliating details, and he knows you can't defend yourself without looking uptight or ruining the mood. He knows you feel like you need to laugh at yourself. He talks over you at dinner parties or hanging out with friends so you look foolish or feel stupid. And everybody laughs along and you sit there feeling irrelevant or exposed or small. That's not banter. It's actually just abuse with an audience and they won't even know what they're seeing or what they're hearing. And honestly, most people aren't even going to call a man out who's being directly verbally abusive. So they definitely are not going to call it out when it's subtle. Here's what this feels like when you're actually living it. You start walking on eggshells, not just about what you do, but actually about what you say. You find yourself rehearsing conversations in your head before you even have them. You plan for the best time to have the conversation, even though it's never a good time. You avoid certain topics completely. You stop sharing your feelings. Why on earth would you hand him more ammunition? So you just lose your voice. And maybe not literally, but in the sense that speaking up to this kind of man, it's actually pointless and it can often be dangerous. And here's the thing. Verbal abuse is not harmless. Words have power and meaning. It leaves real damage. Research shows that verbal aggression in a relationship is actually strongly linked to anxiety, depression, and PTSD. And it's also one of the biggest predictors of physical violence later in the relationship, right? The words come first, the escalation follows. Abuse is progressive. And the impact is everywhere. You start apologizing before every sentence just to kind of soften it, right? This is how women actually get themselves in like the sorry to follow up, but so you preface conversations with like, I don't want to sound stupid, but is it okay if we talk later? You see how the body language changes, the tone changes? You do this because you expect to be mocked, dismissed, ignored. Your voice is quieter, your answers get shorter, and you're like checking his reaction before you respond to other people. That's what living in verbal abuse actually does. It changes the way that you move in the world. But because there's no bruises, society minimizes it. People say every couple fights, or like, he was just joking, don't take it so seriously. Courts will dismiss it because you can't hand them a photograph of your hurt feelings. Let me give you some examples of what it sounds like in an everyday relationship where the abuse is kind of hidden but right in plain sight. You tell him something that matters to you, and he says, "You're so crazy. Why do you always make such a big deal out of nothing?" He acts like he's giving you feedback, right? But it's not feedback, it's abuse. If you disagree on something small, and let's say he explodes, right? "You're so effing stupid. Why do I even talk to you?" We act like, oh, he's just in a bad mood. That's anger. That's abuse. You show hurt after he insults you, and maybe he kind of smirks. Wow, you can't even take a joke. No wonder no one likes you. That's not teasing, it's abuse. He constantly compares you to somebody else, right? "My ex never complained like you do." Or he goes silent for days. He refuses to acknowledge your existence until you apologize for something you didn't even do. You think he's just cooling off? That's abuse. He's just an avoidant. That's abuse. An avoidant might say, "Ooh, I'm really finding myself angry. I need 24 hours to calm down. I need 12 hours to calm down. I need to go take a 20-minute walk, and then let's continue this conversation." Days-long silence is abuse. He's trying to punish you. The man behind this, right? He's not angry or hot-headed. He didn't lose control. He's not bad at communication. He's not traumatized. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows which insults cut you the deepest. He studied you. You think he just stumbles into the most painful things that anyone's ever said to you? He knows how to humiliate you just enough in public that you'll smile through it, and he can deny the intent later or laugh it off and call you dramatic or say you didn't say anything in the moment, even though you couldn't have said anything in the moment. He knows that silence hurts you more than yelling because it leaves you chasing him for these little scraps. And then he tells himself that he's a good guy because clearly you want to be here, right? If you're the one chasing him. He studies your insecurities. He knows your sore spots. He uses them. And in fact, a lot of these guys, they enjoy that double hit, right? Hurting you and then making you question yourself for being hurt. That's the mind game. Some of these abusive men, not all, but some, are very downright sadistic. So let me be clear. If you have been mocked, insulted, silenced, made the butt of jokes, name called in your relationship, you were not being oversensitive. That's abuse. Verbal abuse is violence in communication. And like all abuse, it's about power and control. This is part 4 of the 8 types of abuse. In part 5, I'm going to break down financial abuse, which is one of the most common ways that abusers trap women and one of the least talked about. And trust me, once you hear how financial abuse really works, all the intricate parts, you'll understand why so many women say they can't leave even when they want to. And I'm not sharing what you already know. I'm going to go deeper and tell you a lot about forms of financial abuse that nobody talks about. There is one in particular that makes victims not even know that it's happening. So subscribe now so you don't miss it. And if this resonated, share it and leave a comment, because every time someone says it's just words, they're helping abusers hide. How could it be financial abuse if I had access to the bank accounts? Or I was the one paying the bills, so it couldn't have been abuse. But here's the truth. Financial abuse is not actually about whether or not you touch the money. It's about whether or not you're free to use it without fear or blame or punishment. And in an abusive relationship, that freedom doesn't exist. You can't see it in photos, right? It doesn't leave bruises. But financial abuse is one of the most powerful ways that abusive men keep women stuck. And here's the thing that most people don't realize. Almost every single abusive relationship involves financial abuse. It's not always obvious, but it's always about one thing: control. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and to honor that, I'm continuing my series, The 8 Types of Abuse. In part 1, we did physical abuse, part 2, sexual abuse, part 3, psychological abuse, in part 4, verbal abuse. Today in part 5, we are talking about financial abuse, the obvious ways that it shows up, but more specifically, the hidden ways that nobody talks about, and why money is one of the biggest reasons that women stay, even when every part of them wants to leave. My name is Lisa Sonni. I'm a toxic and abusive relationship expert, author, and certified coach. I help women break trauma bonds, leave abusive men, and rebuild their lives. If you've ever felt like you couldn't leave because you couldn't afford to, or you've been made to feel guilty about money that you didn't even spend, this video is going to make everything click. So subscribe now because I don't want you to miss the rest of this series. So what is financial abuse? It's not just about money. It's about control through money. It's about keeping you financially stuck, dependent, or blamed so that you can't leave. And it shows up in so many more ways than people realize. The obvious forms are easier to recognize, so we're going to start there, but stick around because I'm going to share some really insidious ways that you might not even realize you're being financially abused. Here's a pretty obvious one, right? Except maybe when you're in it, it's not so obvious, but he takes your paychecks. He controls your income. He forbids you from working. He sabotages your job so you can't keep it. He refuses to share financial information, hides assets, racks up debt in your name, controls all the accounts, and gives you an allowance like you're a child. Those are the classic examples that often people think of when they hear financial abuse. But here's the part that nobody talks about. Sometimes you're the one in charge of the money. You have the passwords. The accounts are in your name or in both of your names. You're paying the bills. And it can look like freedom, right? On the outside, everybody thinks you're the one running things. But underneath, it's a trap. And in fact, you're the one running things is the trap. Because when there isn't enough money, and there's never enough, right? It's your fault. Even if you didn't spend a dime on yourself, even if he blew the money on his own bad habits, God only knows what, it's somehow you didn't budget right. You can be carrying the whole load, paying every bill on time, and you'll still get accused of misspending. And if you do buy something small for yourself, he is going to bring it up every time you argue. This setup is actually perfect for him, right? He spends, you manage, you get blamed. This is one of the least recognized forms of financial abuse. Women often tell me, like, but I had access, right? I could have spent if I wanted. Except you couldn't, right? Not without consequences, or there was no money to spend. He still controlled what was acceptable. He still turned every shortage into proof that you were the problem. And this applies to women who are stay-at-home moms and women who earn money outside the home. He controls what is acceptable. He still turns every shortage into some kind of proof that you're the problem. And then there's weaponized generosity, right? He lets you buy a new shirt, or he treats you with money from the household account, but then he holds it over your head forever, or he blames normal spending as something that you should be grateful for, right? I bought you dinner. You're still complaining. I let you buy tampons last week. That's not kindness. That is control, but it's disguised as generosity. Now, another common one is withholding access, right? You technically have money, but you have to ask before you spend. You keep receipts. You're told you have to keep receipts. You have to explain every purchase. You're accountable for pennies while he blows hundreds. That is not a partnership. That's policing. And I swear, every time I talk about this, there is some man in the comment section that's like, but what if she's really bad with money? What if she has a spending problem? That's a different topic, and also something that a lot of abusive men say that isn't actually happening. So hold your horses, bro. Now, financial abuse can also show up as sabotage, right? He undermines your career by refusing childcare so you can't work. He mocks your ambitions until you just give it up. You want to get a job? What do you know? He insists on moving somewhere where your job options are limited, but his aren't, right? He makes sure that you cannot gain independence even if you're capable. And debt is a huge weapon. He might open up credit cards in your name. Maybe he refuses to pay taxes or bills, destroys your credit. Maybe he forces you to co-sign loans for things that only benefit him. He coerces you to make purchases. Now, even if you wanted to leave, you'd be leaving with wrecked credit, piles of debt, no safety net, no way to take care of yourself, no way to take care of your kids if you have them. And this looks different depending on your role, right? Let's talk about this stay-at-home moms and working moms or women who are not moms at all. For stay-at-home moms, financial abuse often means being cut off from working, but it's framed as I'll provide for you. And on the surface, that can sound like a dream, right? You get to stay home with your kids and raise them, not to worry about bringing in money. That's his job and he works so hard. Here's the problem. That arrangement opens the door for abuse. Not all men who work outside the home and the mom is the stay-at-home mom, they're not all abusers. We're talking about the ones that are. Please, I beg of you, do not willfully misunderstand the point that I'm making. Now, one of the points that I am absolutely making is men are not natural providers nor protectors. All of this is part of a transaction. If you both agree, if it's a healthy relationship, yeah, this can work. Do you? But with abusive men, that provider promise, that is a trap. They'll say, I'll take care of you forever, and then they don't. You do everything in the home, right? You're on 24/7, raising kids, running the house, keeping life together, but you have no money. You're made to feel like you don't contribute, even though without you, nothing would function. You're the unpaid CEO, right? Because I hear this all the time. The woman does everything, and then she needs something. She has to ask. She has to ask for groceries, for clothes, for tampons, for gas. You get turned into a child in your own home, right? You can spend whatever you want, just ask. Why would you have to ask, right? It goes from, oh, it's our money to it's our money, but I keep it in an account that you can't access. You're literally standing there with your hand out for basics. And every dollar that you spend comes with strings. You can't save, you can't plan, you can't leave because he's designed it that way. And now for women who do work, right, it can look like him demanding your paycheck or guilting you for spending it on yourself. He might resent your success and punish you by spending recklessly so you never have stability. Or he'll sneer, you know what, you care more about your job than your family. No matter what you do, it's wrong. This is a double bind, obviously, which is so common in abusive relationships. But I want to be clear. While I'm here talking about women being abused by men, the reverse can happen, right? Men can be financially abused too. And it might look like she's draining the accounts, running up debt in his name, or just using money to manipulate him. And that's abuse. That is still abuse. But I want to talk about the difference. For women, financial abuse is one of the main reasons that they can't leave. It lands women in shelters, right? It's what keeps them trapped in dangerous homes. It's what leaves them without the ability to feed their kids. And that's not generally the outcome for men. And I'm not saying that it's not painful or damaging when men experience it. It is. But the impact isn't generally the same. And that's why we need to talk about this in the context of women's safety. Financial abuse doesn't always stop when the relationship ends, right? Post-separation, so many women are dragged into years of economic control. He refuses to pay what he owes, he quits jobs, he underreports his income, all to avoid his obligations. An abusive man does not value a woman's contributions, whether she worked outside the home, made less money than him, made more money than him, or didn't work outside the home but contributed to his career by doing everything at home. He doesn't value your labor. So when that relationship ends, if you want to leave, you deserve nothing. That's exactly the man that's like, you had a cush life for the last 20 years, and now you want half of what I built? Meanwhile, you helped him build it. but he doesn't see it that way. A man like this, he drags out legal battles just to drain your resources. And I'm not going to go too deep into this because post-separation abuse is actually its own episode in this series, but it is worth noting control doesn't magically disappear just because you leave. So what does it feel like when you're living in financial abuse? Well, it feels like being treated like a child, right? Like having to ask for permission for basic needs. Feels like carrying shame for not managing right, even though you're actually carrying everyone. Feeling trapped because you can't afford to leave. And over time, it destroys your confidence in your own ability to survive. And this isn't rare. Studies show that financial abuse is present in 99% of abusive relationships. I'm going to go ahead and say that's basically all. Economic insecurity is one of the biggest reasons that women stay, return, or feel completely forced to stay in a dangerous house. It's not that they don't want to leave. They literally can't. The comment section guaranteed will be filled with women saying, I would leave if I had the money. Can you imagine being the kind of man that knew that your wife would walk out that door if she could, but she's trapped with you? And these men are fine with that because they love that you're trapped. The man behind all of this, he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows that money equals power. Everybody knows that money is power. If he keeps you broke, you can't leave. If he keeps you in charge of the money, he can still blame you for everything. His goal isn't financial stability, right? It's control. So if you have been made to feel guilty for spending on basics, if you've been blamed for shortages in money that you didn't cause, if you've been kept from working, if you've had your money taken, if you've been carrying the whole financial load but still been accused of failure, you have been financially abused, period. This is part 5 of the 8 types of abuse. And in part 6, that's where I'm going to go into post-separation abuse because the control doesn't end when the relationship does. And that episode is going to help so many of you connect the dots. So subscribe now so you don't miss it. And if this resonated, share it and leave a comment because the more we name financial abuse, the fewer women get trapped by it. People love to say, why don't you just leave? What, like leaving makes the abuse stop? Anyone who has lived through an abusive relationship knows the truth. Leaving doesn't end the abuse, it changes the form. And sometimes post-separation abuse is the most dangerous stage of all. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and to honor that, I'm doing this series, The 8 Types of Abuse. And I'm breaking down the patterns of abuse that women live through, and not just the surface level stuff that people recognize. Because abuse doesn't stop when you leave, it often escalates. I'm Lisa Sonni. I'm a toxic and abusive relationship expert, certified relationship coach, and author. And I help women break trauma bonds, leave abusive men, and rebuild their lives. So if you've ever felt like leaving didn't bring you the peace that you expected, the peace that everybody said you would have, this episode is for you. And hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the series where I have been breaking down domestic violence in some of the most covert ways. So let's talk about post-separation abuse, what it really looks like, how it shows up, and why so many women say leaving was just the beginning of the next massive battle. You should probably send this to like at least 5 of your friends or family who just don't get it. When you finally leave, you've actually done the hardest thing imaginable, right? You've broken that daily cycle. You've taken that terrifying first step. And people around you think, great, it's over now. But for abusive men, separation is the ultimate loss of control. And when control is what they've built their identity on, they don't just let it go. They escalate. And that's why post-separation abuse is so brutal. It's about punishing you for leaving, reasserting dominance from a distance, and keeping you trapped in fear when you are no longer under the same roof. And if you share children, co-parenting is the new battlefield. He might withhold the kids, show up late, leave them sitting on the porch waiting. Cliche, but it happens all the time. He cancels plans at the last second, or he just refuses to follow family court orders. He badmouths you, right? Mom's crazy. Mom doesn't care about you. Mom broke up the family. Or he spoils them with gifts to buy their loyalty or guilt trips them into rejecting you. He might even neglect them on purpose, right? Like skipping meals, leaving them unsupervised, exposing them to unsafe people, just to make you panic and look like you're some crazy overprotective parent. Some of these men are like, car seat? Don't be ridiculous. He's 5. He doesn't even need one. And others use custody as blackmail, right? If you start dating again, I will take the kids away. If you don't do what I say, you will never see them again. One client actually told me that her ex would drop their kid off late every single Monday morning, but it was only like 5 or 10 minutes, right? And I know to an outsider, it's like, not a big deal. It's only a few minutes. To her, it meant being late for work every single week and being written up by her boss. He picked the drop-off time on purpose. Another woman said that her ex would show up at their daughter's soccer game. He would sit right behind her and he would whisper in her ear, "You'll regret leaving me. No man will ever come near my kids." The child was on the field, right? Totally oblivious while she sits there frozen in fear. And if she moved seats, he moved too. Then there's harassment, the endless texts and calls and emails. Sometimes it's rage, right? You'll regret this. And sometimes it's begging. I miss you. I'll change. I promise. Sometimes it's baiting. If you really cared about the kids, you'd answer me. You're not child focused. It doesn't really matter how you respond, right? If you ignore him, he escalates. If you reply, he twists your words. You block him, he finds another number. These guys will Venmo you $1 just to send a message or change the Netflix name to call me. It is not communication. It is psychological warfare. And then there's showing up where you are, right? Sitting outside your house, pacing on the driveway, following you on the road, accidentally bumping into you at the grocery store or your workplace. It's not a coincidence. It's stalking. I've actually got a podcast episode with former law enforcement officer Mark Wynn where we go into detail about this in my Real Talk with Lisa Sonni Relationships Uncensored playlist. One of the things we talk about there is the entitlement, right? If she would just answer, then I wouldn't have to show up. He feels like he needs to do this. This is his right. And it doesn't just stop in the real world, right? Cyber stalking is just as common. Fake accounts watching your social media, whether it's him, his mom, the new supply, harassing your friends online, flooding your inbox with threats or with love bombing. Some of them even hack into email accounts or track your phone. One woman actually told me that her ex would leave flowers for her on her front porch after she blocked him on everything. A neighbor was like, "Oh, it's so sweet." To her, she got the message, right? I know where you live and I can get to you anytime. Every appearance, every coincidence, it's a reminder, I still have access to you. I've had clients whose ex tried to run them off the road, plural, and took a baseball bat to the home security system. This is not uncommon. For so many women, the courts actually become another weapon, right? He drags you into endless hearings and filing motions, and not to win, but to just drain your energy, your money, and your time. He fights for custody, not because he wants the kids, because he wants control. He hides assets. He refuses to pay support. He suddenly quits to avoid responsibility. He paints himself as this stable parent and he calls you unstable. And judges and mediators and lawyers and parenting coordinators, they only see the calm. They see this collected version of him. Meanwhile, you're left bankrupt, exhausted, doubting yourself, spinning in circles. And to the whole system, I know that it looks like two people who just can't get along, but you know that it's not conflict, it's control. And money is one of the most common tools that abusers use after separation, right? He refuses to pay child support, but he also refuses to spend any time with the kids. Or he pays late and inconsistently, so you can never plan ahead. And there's $1.13 billion in outstanding support owed right now in the United States. He might dump shared debts on you, ruin your credit, sabotage your job by harassing you at work or spreading lies to your coworkers. Sometimes it's outright abandonment, right? He walks away, leaves you scrambling. You have to cover everything else alone, childcare, money, all of it. And sometimes it's much more subtle, right? He drags his feet on his obligations. He knows you'll spend more enforcing it than you'll ever recover. Then there are the threats, not always shouted, right? Some are whispered or implied or just delivered with kind of a calm smile. If you ever bring another man around my kids, I'll take his life. No judge will ever believe you. You'll lose everything. You'll never be free of me. I'll ruin you. Sometimes he even threatens himself, right? If you leave me, I'll take my own life and it'll be your fault. That's not vulnerability. That's control. And women take these threats seriously because they know what he's capable of. It's not paranoia, it's survival. And some men put this in writing, but the truth is most don't. So you can't even get the police to help. Abusive men know how to stay under the radar. And not all post-separation abuse actually looks like harassment. Sometimes it's neglect. He stops showing up for the kids. He doesn't even provide the basics when they're with him, disappears for weeks, resurfaces like nothing happened. And others might think, at least he's gone, at least he's not bothering you. But that abandonment forces you to do everything financially, emotionally, logistically. And then people are like, well, you had these kids. Yeah, we had these kids, actually. Maybe she didn't sign up to do it alone. So when you point all of this out, he plays the victim and he says some crap like, she won't even let me see the kids. That tale is as old as time. And then there's the emotional cost that people don't even see. The exhaustion of juggling lawyers and jobs and kids, all while he keeps you in survival mode. The shame of having to explain to schools or bosses or friends why he keeps popping up. The isolation of when people say, aren't you over it yet? Over what? It's still happening. It's not the past. Tell me how you get over something that you are still living, right? The way that you're forced to live half in the present and half in hypervigilance, scanning for his next ambush. Sometimes post-separation abuse is actually so bad that women go back. And trust me, it is not because they want to. It's not because they think he'll change. But somehow it's like, at least inside the relationship, maybe the abuse was kind of predictable. Like you could anticipate it, manage it, you could keep the peace. On the outside, it's like 24/7 chaos and there's no way to contain it because you don't know. That's why some women struggle to go no contact, because if they're in contact, they feel like they can manage it better. There's still a sense of control for the victim. And I mean control over themselves and their own safety. I had a client tell me, I left, but it was so relentless that going back was the only way I could breathe. That doesn't mean that leaving was wrong, right? It means that he's proving exactly who he always was, right? He's a man who refuses to let go of control. So all this to say, is leaving worth it? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know it sounds grim. Honestly, this is why I don't talk about this very often, because people hear post-separation abuse gets worse. And I realize, like, who would leave if everything gets worse? What kind of pitch is this to leave if things get worse? Leaving can make it worse before it gets better. But we need to be honest. Women are at the highest risk of being killed by an abusive partner in the weeks and months right after leaving. And I don't say that to scare you. It's to validate that if you felt unsafe after leaving, you weren't imagining it. It's real. That's why safety planning matters so much, and why support networks matter, and why people say, tell your neighbors and tell the people around you. It's why just leave is one of the most harmful and frankly stupid things that people say. My take on it is the majority of people know they need to leave. It's not just leave. It's complicated, it's dangerous, and it costs a lot of money. It costs you so many things, potentially your life. So why does she stay? This entire video is why. And we haven't even gotten to the part about how trauma bonds play right into this. Because when he's harassing you, threatening you, dragging you to court, part of you still remembers all of the good moments, the apologies, the times he promised to change. So even when you know it's abuse, you might catch yourself still wondering, would it be easier if I just went back? And that's the hook that he keeps using even after you've left. So if you've left and you're facing this kind of abuse, the problem isn't you. You didn't make it worse by leaving. You revealed the truth about him by leaving. This is evidence that this was the right decision. Post-separation abuse just proves what you always knew. It was never about love. It was always about power. And if you're still in the relationship and you're hearing this and you're terrified of what might happen if you leave, leaving is a personal choice. Nobody gets to dictate when or how you do it. And if you're not ready yet, that doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. This is part 6 of my series, The 8 Types of Abuse. We've already covered physical and sexual, psychological, verbal, financial abuse. Today we talked about post-separation abuse. And in the next episode, we are going to tackle one of the most misunderstood terms in this space, reactive abuse. I call it a reactive response. People call it reactive abuse, but I want to explain in that video why that language is just wrong and what it really means when you snap under his pressure. So subscribe so you don't miss it. Share this video with somebody who needs to know that leaving doesn't make the abuse stop, but it does make the freedom possible. Reactive abuse is one of the most confusing terms that you'll ever hear in the domestic violence space. Some people think that it refers to the perpetrator, right? His abuse that makes the victim react. But that's not what it means. And honestly, the name itself is part of the problem. The actual definition has always been about the victim. It's your reaction when you've been pushed too far. It describes how you can appear to be the abusive one when really you were reacting to abuse. That's why I don't call it reactive abuse at all anymore. I call it a reactive response. And I don't say that like I coined the term. The first I'd personally heard that term used, reactive response, was on btr.org. Now, abuse is really about intention and control. So a reaction under pressure isn't abuse. It's survival. It's a response, a normal response to being mistreated. And other experts back this up. According to Very Well Mind, reactive abuse happens when someone who's been abused lashes out in verbal or physical ways, and then abusers use that against the victim to claim that she's abusive. The Greene County Family Justice Center explains that victims often question themselves after these reactions, right? They wonder if they're just as bad as their abuser, exactly how their abuser wants them to feel. Other advocates like Flying Free even suggest that reactive defense is a better name. Some people even call it self-defense, but labeling it wrongly shifts the blame onto the victim. The National Domestic Violence Hotline points out the exact same thing. Abusers twist these reactions to make it look like mutual abuse, when in reality, the power and control imbalance has never changed. And as a quick aside, mutual abuse doesn't exist. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and this is part 7 of my series, The 8 Types of Abuse. We've already covered physical and sexual, psychological, verbal, financial, and post-separation abuse, but today we are talking about one of the most misunderstood parts of the cycle, reactive responses. And if you've ever yelled or slammed a door and said something cruel that you regret, or you've ever thrown something in the middle of an argument, I need you to hear this. That moment doesn't make you the abuser. I'm Lisa Sonni. I'm a toxic and abusive relationship expert. I'm an author and certified coach. I help women break trauma bonds, leave abusive men, and rebuild their lives. And this episode, it's going to be uncomfortable because we're going to talk about the moments that you might not even want to admit to yourself. But by the end, I want you to understand what's really happening and why your reaction was never the same thing as his abuse. They're so good at convincing you that you're the problem. Subscribe now so you don't miss the final video in the series where we cover religious and spiritual abuse, which is one of the most insidious and rarely named types. But let's start here. Abuse really isn't about who yells louder. Abuse is about intent, control, and a consistent pattern of power over someone else. So when you finally yell, when you finally snap, that doesn't erase the months or years of him pushing you to that breaking point. And make no mistake, abusers engineer these situations, right? They want you to break. They know exactly what buttons to press. They know how long to withhold, what lie to repeat, and when to needle you until you explode. And then they stand back, right? Arms folded, calm as ever. And they're like, see, you're the crazy one. That's the setup. And they're often recording that moment. Not always, but that's a real trap. Now, some people call this crazy making, but here's how this plays out in real life, okay? He follows you from room to room when you're begging for space or you're begging him to stop until you finally scream to get him out. He pokes and pokes with insults. You're lazy, you're worthless, you're pathetic, until you throw something just to make it stop. He lies with a straight face. I never said that. You imagined it. You're so paranoid. You know that it's false, but he won't budge, and that fury and rage builds until it just flies out. He insults you in front of friends, knowing that you don't want to cause a scene. And then he whispers something so cruel that you snap publicly, and then you look like the problem. Or he stonewalls you, right? Sitting in silence, sits there for hours. He refuses to answer you. Eventually, your nervous system can't take it and you lash out. And I know from the outside, right? It looks like you are the aggressor. And inside, it feels like you've been held hostage in this no-win trap. Your back pressed against a wall. Your body could not hold the pressure anymore. It is like a pressure cooker. This is where the nervous system piece matters so much. When you are under threat, your body has 4 survival responses, right? Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Most women in abusive relationships actually live in freeze and fawn. You shut down, you appease, you avoid, but sometimes your system flips to fight. That's the moment you yell, you slam a door, you snap. And it's not because you chose to be abusive. It's because your nervous system is screaming, enough. And here's the part men and women do not like to face. There are women in prison right now for killing their husbands after years of abuse, emotional, psychological, physical, all of it, because they saw no other way out. Women in abusive relationships are trapped in ways that men just aren't. Research shows that the vast majority of women that are incarcerated for killing a male partner had been abused by him first. Some had even reported it and they were just ignored. So others stayed silent because they knew nothing would change. And like, hello, we live in a world where there are little to no consequences for abusive men, even when there's proof. So when these women finally fought back, the system called it murder, not self-defense. That's how misunderstood reactive responses are. They can push women to the absolute edge and then punish them for surviving. And listen, I'm not saying that women can't be abusive too, so don't willfully misunderstand what I'm saying. Don't misunderstand the point that I'm making. While women can be abusive too, it doesn't change the fact that the majority of women in prison for murder, they murdered the perpetrator of their abuse. And I'm not excusing it. I'm not saying it's a good reaction or that it's okay or an appropriate thing to do. Do I really have to say that murder is wrong? I probably do, don't I? This is the internet, after all. Murder is wrong. I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but do you ever find it interesting that if a woman cheats on a man and then he beats her, or a woman simply tries to peacefully divorce her abusive husband and he kills her, for example, so many people will say, what did she expect? Or show understanding of his reaction, right? They make jokes about her taking half, but when a woman murders her perpetrator of abuse, suddenly there is absolutely nothing that could justify it. Just absolutely nothing. It's wrong, period. I'm just saying, okay? Men talk all day long about how women provoke them, but apparently men can't provoke women. That's unfair. You've taken it too far, Lisa. Here is the tragic part of these responses. Outside of women who were defending themselves landing in jail, that fight response is the one that he's waiting for. That's why he records it on his phone, right? He tells your friend, see, she's unstable. He tells the kids, mommy has anger problems. He tells your therapist or the mediator, I just don't know what to do with her temper. And because these outsiders only see the explosion, not months of provocation, you get painted as the problem. And professionals fall for this trap too, right? Therapists, mediators, judges, they see your outburst, but they don't see the context. They call it mutual conflict. In fact, in so many cases, right, they might see the symptom, the reaction, and they're not even interested in the context or what happened. Now that makes you doubt yourself even more when really they're just missing the setup that he engineered. Now, I really want you to understand where the term reactive abuse even came from. In domestic violence advocacy, people actually noticed how survivors were being blamed for their own reactions, and they coined the term to describe it. But I think here's the mistake. Putting the word abuse in the name made it sound like the victim was guilty of abuse too, which only made the shame worse. And that's why I don't use it anymore. I call it a reactive response. I have old videos, me talking about reactive abuse, but I stopped because language matters. And here's what that shame really feels like, right? You finally collapse on the couch after one of those fights and you think, oh my God, I sounded just like him. Or oh, I can't believe I threw that. Or maybe I'm the toxic one. And that shame is so friggin' heavy. It actually deepens the trauma bond because the only person that sees that side of you is him. So you feel complicit in your own abuse. And so many women feel that shame for years, convinced that their one reaction somehow cancels out all of his ongoing cruelty. But I want to be clear that your reaction doesn't erase his abuse. Your explosion doesn't make you the abuser. It actually proves just how far he pushed you. But society loves to minimize this, and they love to blame women by saying, well, you both said things, or it takes two. And that's the kind of sloppy, false equivalence, both sides thinking garbage that keeps women silent. Because yeah, you both said things. That's true. But only one of you was saying it as a tactic of control. The other was reacting in desperation. And that's not the same thing. And also, this is actually where his performance comes in, right? Who is the best at playing the victim? The perpetrator. He says that he reacted to you. You'll say that you reacted to him, and then you're confused, right? His reaction is either that he's doing this on purpose to get your reaction and that he's entitled to treat you this way, but you're not entitled to react. How dare you, right? Some of these men, they know how to stay calm on purpose. Calm is a weapon. He knows how to keep his voice low, to stand there very calm, very chill, makes you look like the irrational one. His calmness isn't self-control. It's part of the act. He wants you flailing and screaming so that he looks reasonable. And the double standard is brutal. When he yells, it's anger. When you yell, it's abuse. When he screams, people just, oh, he lost his temper. But when you scream, you're the problem. And let's talk about the man behind this for a minute, right? He's not surprised when you snap because he engineered it. He manufactured it. That's one of the biggest points that I'm making here, right? You understand this. He wants you off balance so he can feel in control. He wants the recording. He wants the proof, the story to tell. And he wants the shame to sink into you. Shame is like the glue that holds all of this together. The more ashamed you feel, the less likely you are to tell anyone what's happening. He knows this, and that's why he keeps doing it. People around you are going to be like, well, you both treated each other badly. You know, I've seen both. But what they saw is reactive abuse. They saw your response. Now, some lesser known setups look like this. He deliberately mispronounces your name or he mocks your background, and it antagonizes you until you explode. He touches you in a way that he knows you hate over and over until you shove him away. And then he's like, see, you're so violent. He pretends not to understand simple requests. He'll be like, I don't get it, until you yell. Or he accuses you of cheating with this little smirk night after night until finally you scream, shut up. Then he calmly says, why are you so defensive if you've got nothing to hide? Those are traps. They're not accidents. So let's put this in perspective. Abuse really isn't about isolated incidents. It's about a consistent pattern of power and control. A reactive response is a symptom of being abused. It's not evidence that you're abusive. The shame that you feel for how you reacted isn't your shame. So if you're sitting here thinking about the worst thing you ever did, the cruelest thing you ever did in the relationship, I know that horrible, sick feeling in your stomach. I felt it too. But I want you to hear me. That moment does not define you. It was a nervous system pushed to the breaking point by an abusive man who wanted you to break. And that's why when women leave, you notice that those reactions stop. You notice that you never had those reactions in previous relationships. And trust me when I say, I know he's telling you that this is the only relationship that he's ever been in with these kinds of reactions. But just because he said that doesn't make it true. These men have patterns of this happening in so many relationships. You know that you don't. And that's the point. It doesn't happen for you anymore because the pressure cooker isn't there anymore and the fight response doesn't get triggered. That alone proves that it was never your nature. It was the abuse. This was part 7 of the 8 types of abuse. In part 8, we're covering religious and spiritual abuse and how men twist scripture and faith and morality into weapons of control. That video is really going to challenge a lot of people, but it needs to be said. So if this resonated with you, subscribe so you don't miss it, and share this video and comment, because someone who needs to hear that their worst moment does not erase the truth could watch this video. They need to know they were abused. When you think of abuse, religion is probably not the first thing that comes to mind, but for a lot of women, faith has been one of the sharpest weapons used against them. The very thing that was supposed to guide them, comfort them, connect them to God, got twisted into a tool of control by the man that they loved. And that's what we're talking about today, religious and spiritual abuse. And this isn't about one religion. It's not an attack on Christianity or Islam or Judaism or Hinduism or spirituality itself. This is about abusive men who weaponize faith, and men of all faiths do this. I want to be super clear. I almost put this at the end of the video, but I want to make it so clear right at the beginning. This is not an attack on religion. This is an attack on the men who weaponize it against women. Religious abuse is when he says, the Bible says wives must submit, and uses that to demand obedience or sex. It's when he says divorce is a sin, so leaving him means you're disobeying God. It's when he threatens you with hell or shame or being cut off from your community if you don't comply. It's when he frames prayer as punishment, right? I'll pray for your disobedience, like you're the problem for not bowing down. Now, I'm Lisa Sonni. I'm a toxic and abusive relationship expert, and I'm a certified coach. And I help women of all backgrounds and all faiths break trauma bonds, leave abusive men, and rebuild their lives. And this is the 8th video in my series for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, all about religious abuse. Check the playlist and make sure to watch the rest of the series, hit subscribe, and share the videos. Religious abuse, it's not always that blatant. Sometimes it's framed as a lesson. God is teaching you patience through me. Sometimes it's twisting forgiveness into this like get out of jail free card, right? God says you have to forgive me, so you can't bring this up again. Or how can you not forgive me for this? Sometimes they're pulling in pastors or ministers or Christian counselors who tell you marriage is hard, pray harder, or God hates divorce, you should submit more. They think they're being pastoral. They're not. They're enabling him. And by the way, sometimes he is the pastor. And the numbers back this up. Lifeway research actually found that 2/3 of Protestant pastors underestimated how much domestic violence was happening in their congregations. So women go to them, and it's not just Protestants, right? Women go to them, they're desperate for help, and then they downplay the danger. That doesn't just fail women, it literally protects abusive men. And it's not only Christianity, right? In Muslim contexts, women are told it's their duty to obey their husbands in everything. In Jewish communities, men withhold the get, the religious divorce, as a way to trap women indefinitely. In Hindu families, women are told that leaving dishonors their entire lineage. In these new age circles, men say things like, you're just manifesting this, or your energy is so toxic, as if abuse is your karma, not their choice, right? Different religions, different words, same weapon. But here's the part that's important, right? Because abusive men, they don't want you to remember this part. Every major faith tradition teaches love and compassion and responsibility in marriage. Christianity talks about husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church, with sacrifice, not domination. In Islam, marriage is described as a partnership built on tranquility and mercy. Judaism calls for respect and joy between a husband and wife, and Hindu teachings speak of balance and mutual duty and care. Even in spiritual circles, not particularly religious, the core message is healing and connection and growth. But abusive men don't quote those verses, do they? They don't quote those sutras, those principles. They cherry pick the parts that benefit them, and they ignore the parts that would hold them accountable. And the impact on women is devastating because it's not just an attack on your autonomy, it's an attack on your soul. So you start to wonder, am I defying God if I resist? Will I lose my salvation if I leave? Will I lose my whole community? Will they turn against me? So many women who escape abusive marriages also feel like they lost their church, their mosque, their temple, their whole spiritual identity, because that is how deep this cuts. And abusers know this. Religion gives them cover, right? It makes their control look legitimate. To outsiders, he's a godly man. He's a spiritual leader. He's a good husband. To you, he's a tyrant in a pew. It's not just him. When pastors and imams and rabbis and priests or Christian counselors preach submission and forgiveness while ignoring abuse, they are not staying neutral. They are complicit. They are on his side. Now, I also want to talk about something that's really interesting here, because this is where communal narcissism shows up. Now, not every abuser is a diagnosable narcissist, I know, although I do agree with Dr. Ramani that all domestic abusers are narcissistic. But the DSM-5, which is the manual that psychotherapists and psychologists use, right? It doesn't describe different types of narcissists, but it's commonly accepted that a communal narcissist is a subtype. But that term, right? It describes what so many women have lived through. A communal narcissist is the man who builds his entire image on being the good guy, the godly man, the good husband, the one that serves his church, his community. He helps the neighbors. He's nice. He's humble. He's generous. He's inspiring. Behind closed doors, he's cruel. And that's what makes it so hard to speak up. Because when you finally do, people say, but he's such a good man. He's so devoted. He would never do that. And his public image is his alibi. He doesn't just hide behind faith, he performs it. And that performance makes the abuse easier to deny. I want to be fair here, though. Not every leader gets it wrong, right? There are pastors and imams and rabbis and priests who stand with survivors and say the truth out loud. Abuse is sin, not divorce. There are plenty that will tell you to leave your spouse and that abuse and adultery are fabulous reasons to leave. God hates abuse, just so we're super crystal clear, okay? For many women, their faith was the very thing that gave them the strength to leave. The problem is not the belief itself. The problem is when the belief is twisted into a weapon. And I've heard women say things to me like, well, he told me that God hates divorce, so if I left, I would be the one sinning. He said a wife is supposed to respect her husband as the head of the household, no matter how he treats her. He told me that denying him sex was against scripture, that I was breaking my vows if I said no. He said it was my job to submit, that if I just humbled myself, the marriage would be peaceful. And sometimes it's not even framed as God's command, right? I feel like sometimes maybe that's a little bit too obvious for the really covert ones. It's just patriarchy with a religious accent, right? A good wife keeps her husband happy. If you were more supportive, I wouldn't get so angry. You're supposed to build him up, not tear him down. But he hides behind all this male entitlement. He just sprinkles in some scripture, so you second guess whether it's abuse or just your duty. Other women have told me he used the pulpit like a shield, right? Everybody thought he was such a godly man, so when I spoke up, I was painted as the rebellious wife. I got called a Jezebel. Or he told me that keeping quiet was part of being a Proverbs 31 woman. These are not holy truths. They are manipulations. They sound spiritual. Maybe they even sound noble, but they're really just control wrapped in religious language. And the whole point is to make you doubt yourself while keeping him firmly in charge. So here's the truth. Faith, scripture, prayer, they were never meant to be weapons. If your partner uses them to shame you or control you, trap you, that's not faith, it's abuse. And if your religious leaders, your counselors, your community side with him, it really doesn't mean that you're wrong. It means that they've chosen comfort over courage. This video closes out the official 8 types of abuse series, but I'm actually not stopping here. I think we need a bonus video, and that will be the very last in the series. In the next video, I actually want to go over some of the lesser known types of abuse, legal abuse, digital abuse, immigration related abuse, reproductive abuse, because those deserve to be named as well. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Share this video, share the whole playlist with somebody who needs to know that they're not alone if their faith was weaponized against them. And I want to end with a quote from Holly Tidwell, a former pastor. She said this on my podcast, Real Talk with Lisa Sonni, Relationships Uncensored. Her screen name is Hope with Holly if you're looking for her. If Jesus saw how he was treating you, he'd be flipping tables. Most people think by now they know all the types of abuse, right? And in this series, we've gone through the big 8, right? Physical, sexual, psychological, verbal, financial, post-separation, reactive responses, and religious abuse. But the truth is, those categories kind of don't cover everything. There are other forms of abuse that don't get named very often, and that's exactly why they're so effective. They're harder to spot, harder to prove, and easier for him to deny, which is why I'm calling this video sort of a bonus, the hidden types of abuse that deserve just as much attention as the rest. I'm Lisa Sonni. I'm a toxic and abusive relationship expert. I'm a certified relationship coach and author, and I help women break trauma bonds, leave abusive men, and rebuild their lives. This is part 9 of my series, The 8 Types of Abuse. So subscribe because you don't want to miss more content like this, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that just because abuse doesn't leave bruises, it doesn't mean that it's not real. So let's expose some of these more hidden types one by one. Legal abuse, sometimes called litigation abuse, it actually falls both under psychological and financial abuse. It's when he weaponizes the court system to keep control. And we hear this constantly, right? He drags you into endless hearings, not to win, but to drain you. He files false reports to Children Protective Services, knowing that you're going to spend weeks proving your innocence. He will fight for custody, not because he wants the kids, but because he wants access to you. One woman has told me that her ex actually filed motion after motion after motion just so she had to keep taking days off work. She almost lost her job because of how much time she was forced to spend in court. And from the outside, it always looks like 2 people in conflict, but in reality, he was using the system to punish her. And abusive men, they know exactly how to play it, right? They sit in court, calm, collected, polite. You're exhausted, scared, and emotional, and then that's used against you. Digital abuse is another one that actually also fits under psychological abuse, but I really feel like it deserves its own spotlight. Technology has given abusive men this brand new toolbox, tracking your location through apps, installing spyware on your phone, hacking your email, fake accounts to stalk your social media, flooding your phone with messages or using cash apps to sneak in notes, hiding cameras in your home. And here's the part that nobody talks about. Most of this is totally invisible, right? Your phone might feel slower. Your battery drains too fast. You're left wondering if you're paranoid, but yet he always seems to know where you are. You always feel unsafe, but you can't pinpoint why. And that confusion is part of the abuse. And when you tell someone that this is happening, they might say something like, well, just block him. Anyone who's lived this knows you block him, he makes another account. It's like whack-a-mole. You block his number, he uses a new one or calls private. Block his email. Is that even a thing? It goes into your junk box. Plus, blocking him makes him angry and then he might show up, right? None of this is actually about reaching you. It's about proving that he still can. Another one is called reproductive abuse. That obviously overlaps with sexual abuse and physical abuse, but this is when he takes control of your ability to choose if, when, or how to have children. Maybe he sabotages your birth control, refuses to use protection, stealthing, right? Removing the condom without your consent, pressuring you into pregnancy, pressuring you into an abortion, or demanding that you keep a pregnancy that you don't feel safe carrying. One woman told me that her husband flushed her birth control pills down the toilet because if you loved me, you'd want my baby. Another said that her partner withheld sex until she agreed to stop using contraception. This isn't about family planning. This is men baby trapping women. It's about power. Abusers know that pregnancy makes you more dependent. It makes you more vulnerable. It makes it harder to leave. And that's why reproductive abuse is so common and so devastating. Another one is immigration-related abuse, right? This obviously crosses into like financial, psychological, post-separation abuse. It's when he uses your immigration status as leverage. Maybe he threatens to cancel your sponsorship. Maybe he hides your passport. Maybe he says, if you leave, I'll have you deported. I've heard women say that their partners lied about their rights, telling them that they couldn't work, couldn't drive, couldn't call the police. What makes this abuse so insidious is the fear that it creates. If you don't know the law, you are forced to trust him, and he probably started nice, so you do. And he knows it. He counts on that confusion, on your isolation, the fact that you don't have your family nearby or any friends or a safety net to fall back on. That's not just cruelty, it is a strategy. Now, pet abuse tends to fall under physical abuse, but people rarely talk about it because it's not abuse of you. Abusers know that pets are family. They know that hurting your dog, your cat, or even a goldfish will break you in ways that hitting you might not. I've had women tell me that their ex threatened to kill their dog if they ever left. Others have even said that he refused to pay for vet care knowing that the pet would suffer in pain. Some men use pets as hostages. If you go, you're never going to see that dog again. The cruelty isn't random, it's calculated. I know someone whose husband would shoot a squirrel if she doesn't have sex with him on command. Abusive men know that you will endure almost anything yourself, but the thought of your child or your pet or animals being hurt, it's unbearable. And that's why they use it. Now, another one is social or community abuse, and it kind of fits under psychological abuse, and it also could fit under post-separation abuse. It's when he controls the narrative in your entire social world, right? He smears your name to friends and family, church, work. He paints himself as the good guy, obviously, the devoted dad. He's the victim of your craziness. Meanwhile, you're isolated, cut off from support because the people that you once leaned on now see you through his filter. And this can look like little comments at a barbecue, right? She's been under a lot of stress. Don't take her too seriously. Or it can be like full-on campaigns, right? Telling your boss that you're unstable, convincing your family that you're the problem. And the damage isn't just social, right? It's survival. When he controls the story, you lose your community, and isolation is literally one of the strongest tools that abusers have. Now, another one is semantic abuse, and this one is often buried inside verbal abuse or psychological abuse, but it really does deserve its own category, and I bet this has happened to you. Semantic abuse is when he weaponizes the words themselves, right? He twists meanings, he's debating the definition, he traps you in arguments about language instead of the truth. Sounds like this: I didn't lie, I just didn't tell you. I didn't yell. I raised my voice. You said you hate me. That's verbal abuse. Or I didn't cheat because technically we weren't exclusive. Technically it was a break. You see what happens? You end up arguing the dictionary instead of reality. You're totally off topic now. He gets you so tangled up in semantics that you forget the bigger picture: betrayal, cruelty, and the pattern. Semantic abuse is actually exhausting by design. It's meant to destabilize you, right? Make you doubt yourself and wear you down so that you stop fighting. And here's the type of man who does this. He is smug. He loves debates. He thrives on being technically right. He would rather win a point than take accountability. And in private, he uses that skill not to teach, not to discuss, to control. So why call these hidden types of abuse? Because they often get minimized. People say, well, that's not abuse. That's just how court goes. That's not abuse. That's how the internet works. That's not abuse. It's just word games. No. These are extensions of the primary types that we've already covered in the series. Legal abuse falls under psychological and financial. Digital falls under psychological. Reproductive abuse under sexual and physical. Immigration abuse under financial and psychological, pet abuse under physical, social and community abuse under psychological and post-separation, semantic abuse under verbal and psychological. These categories all overlap, right? But the impact is the same: control and fear and humiliation, dependence. The truth is, abusive men count on these forms being ignored. They know that the courts won't call it abuse. This is the whole point, right? Covert abuse. People don't even see it. Everything could be something else, right? It's abuse, or is it an argument? Is it abuse, or is it how the court system works? They know that the courts won't call it abuse. They know that friends won't recognize online stalking. They know that pastors will just dismiss it as marital conflict. They know that you will end up questioning yourself, and that's how they get away with it. That's why they get away with it. So let's stop letting them. Abuse isn't always a bruise or a scream or a shove. It's in paperwork. It's in your phone. It's in your body. It's in your pet's leash. It's in your own words being turned against you. And the more we name these, the less invisible they become. This was part 9 and the final video of the 8 types of abuse. This is the bonus episode explaining all the hidden forms that just don't get enough attention. So if this hit home for you, I want you to hit subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this. But share this video, share the whole series with someone who needs to hear that just because their abuse didn't fit into this neat little category, that it doesn't mean that it wasn't real. Abuse is abuse. And the first step towards healing is being able to name it.